Yeah.
So it's such a fine dance to be a parent, I would say. And there's lots of mistakes. And one of the things that Jake and I always do is, it's I'm sorry is like a full-time job around here. Like apologizing to one another. We mess up and we are short-tempered, or we, aren't as kind to one another as we should be. And I think it's important to have that
Yeah.
that just happens. Like we
Yes.
apologize. I'm like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
It's too much. So I think that's a part of the connection piece. I think that's part of why my kids tell me too many things. So that's all part of it. But I think having the traditional anchors, though, of like the Lord's Prayer, the liturgy, the rhythms, I think
Yeah.
it's so core for Gen Z and Alpha, because they're oversaturated and they're overstimulated, and we do have that rhythm to offer them that's going to really carry them through. And I can see
Yeah.
that as they're growing,
Yeah.
that they have that flex to hit that space if they need to. So
Yeah. That's awesome. I think that's very encouraging for parents. I've already said we only have littles, but we also try to say I'm sorry as much as we can, to the point where now sometimes our 3-year-old like demands that we say sorry.
like, that wasn't nice.
He has told me that before. So we just finished we watched this show. I don't think it's been super popular. It's called Mrs. Davis. It's on
Yes.
Peacock streaming. We just finished it last night, and it's kind of weird. There's like some interesting faith threads, some things that are a little off, but like very interesting to think about and watch. But in the last episode, the show is about a nun. I don't want to get too into it, but her mother superior says to her, mercy and forgiveness is the greatest gift you can ever give someone. And that's a simple line, but so good and so important to remember as parents, because it's hard to say you're sorry to anyone, but especially a small child or a very emotionally charged teenager. I can imagine.
Yeah. All the feels all the time. And I think what's also helpful is like logic. I mean, we had Nicole Gibson at the Sparks conference, and I think like neuro understanding is really important as you're raising kids. Like, where are they? Like, what are they capable of? Their frontal lobes aren't complete. Boys take a long time for their brains to be totally, cooked until they're in their 20s. That's helpful to know. So there's just, it's helpful information to know and have empathy and understanding for your teen, that they're not just like out of whack for no reason, but they're like, oh, well, their bodies are chemical.
Yeah.
And they've got things happening. And then your approach to them, I think, is so different than if you imagine that's the bound will thing, right? So that they're bound, and this is part of that process. And, as you're rubbing up against each other, I think that really helps with the empathy process in the parenting.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a lot of fears around where Christianity is headed, and maybe even specifically in the US, but just, what's happening in the coming generations. What is your hope for Gen Z and Gen Alpha as they're growing up? What do you hope to see happen for them, and then like maybe even Christianity in particular for within that generation or those generations?
I mean, I would love for them to have a perspective of the Bible that's like aligned with like the redemptive meta narrative, right? And to know that like God is actively with us and for us in all these ways. That's like curious and interesting, and like moving through Rahab and Tamar and like all of these characters. Like God does that for in the Bible, and he does that for us, like in our current moment. I would love for this generation to be able to have a digital break from in church settings. That's just like
Yeah.
a me thing. But I think they're overly saturated. I think their minds are going to be formed so differently than all of us because they are digital age and they've been exposed to screens in such a different way. And we don't really know what the play is going to be out on that. But wouldn't it be
Mhm.
nice for the church to be a place where um, they had a time to get tactile, really connect,
Yeah.
that they aren't they aren't overstimulated all over again. It's just more of the same thing. Because I
Mm.
think that their brains need a screen break and processing space and a place to have like real emotional connection. And I just don't see how that can happen with a saturation of more digital content towards them.
Yeah.
So that's just, a genie wish from Mel. Like, good. So that's why we stay tactile.
Yeah.
But I want them to be anchored and assured and to really know what they've been given and who they belong to,
Yeah.
and so that they can go out in the world and have empathy and forgiveness can exist between one another. Like, I think that's part
Mm.
of the issue that we're having currently in a lot of our in our society is this rub up against each other because there's not a real understanding that we've all been forgiven much, right? So then in the
Yeah.
workplace and all the places that humans navigate, that's not core to who we are or understanding and our nature. And so then we can't forgive each other in the workplace and other places that we exist. And
Mm.
wouldn't that be nice?